And not only us cattle, but also internationally,
Yes.
using the dollar as a form of imperialism,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, through the economic hitman model of like getting countries onto using the dollar for trade and then taking on our infrastructure projects and us sabotaging those projects so that they're indebted to us essentially into perpetuity, which is also why the IMF and the BIS, which are offshoots from the Federal Reserve Bretton Woods system, that's why they've been pushing back against El Salvador so much, because El Salvador was the one to be like, we're going to try something different.
Mike, it's been a long while, but I thank you for coming on my show. You're one of the longest friends I have in the Bitcoin space, and I've always valued your perspective, your insight, your writings, and it's time to have this conversation. It's long overdue.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. It's long overdue, and I don't think a lot of people can really grasp like what we mean by long overdue. Because like for those that haven't been around, like you and I used to be on like talking on Spaces or in like the Bitcoin Magazine writers chat
That's
for
right.
quite often and for quite a while, and like
Mhm.
then everything kind of just like people started getting new positions in different areas and exposure to different angles of, I don't know, like maybe attention would be like what I would call it. And then we all got pulled in different directions to different little like quiet corners of the
That's right.
Bitcoin community that are not so quiet at the same time.
And I think it just goes to show how Bitcoin is like this. I don't like to call it this, but it is truly alive. And as these tendrils shoot out, and someone is riding on that tendril, and they're going to touch this point and impact these people, whereas this other person will be, it deviates or it diverges, and this person is going over there. But those tendrils also grow, and then they may meet up again,
Yep.
and I think it's finally time to meet up again on my podcast. I hope you bring all the boys to the yard, as Kelly likes to say back in the day. Um, so I normally talk about the small talk again. I normally talk about the small talk first. How did you get into Bitcoin? And this is how I know you. We're going to touch on that during the hour, but Mike, you have had so many deep, amazing concepts painted with your words. I want to ask this question. I was going to save it for the end. We're going to start off with it first.
Let's do it.
After all these years, and it's long, so I'm reading on the side. After all these years, do you still believe Bitcoin is going to not only change the world, but change some way how decisions are made? And what I mean by that is like the incentive structure of society, like costly wars, costly endless wars, taxation, the way we're taxed, or if we're taxed at all, bloated government, and the incentives to make government bigger and bigger and bigger. Or do you see Bitcoin as creating a new class of wealthy that will continue to propagate the fiat societal death spiral, which means just new rich people doing the same old shit? What say you?
I think all of it is going to happen. Actually, that's like the in my mind that's the proper answer, because we're seeing a lot of stuff happening that I think is actually thanks to Bitcoin, but I don't think a lot of people are aware of it, because like I use my story for example. And this will kind of like flirt with the topic that I wanted to get into later with like how I came into Bitcoin. When I first got into like looking into Bitcoin, it caused me to have to research and understand money first. And researching and understanding money and the history and the development of it, and then getting into reading like The Creature from Jekyll Island and how the Federal Reserve got made. Uh it raised a lot of questions, right? As it should, because like a lot of like that kind of like that aspect of American history has just been buried and ignored, like especially in the American public education realm. And so I think a lot of like, for example, is the the Doge, Department of Government Efficiency, and recent exclamation by the soon to be Trump administration stating how they're looking into doing away with income tax. That's a big deal. And I don't think people would have really started asking about it, like, or even be like bringing up like a conversation point like that without Bitcoin getting pushed into the mainstream so aggressively. And I think we're going to see a lot of things happen because of that, because of like because of the topics and the investigative kind of like rabbit holes that like people that get interested in Bitcoin go down. And I think that's also going to touch on it's going to touch on aspects of just like investing strategy and and like fiduciary responsibility and all of that. I think that there's going to be a lot of ripple effects from this whole kind of like second renaissance that Bitcoin is bringing out. And that's also going to be like the point of like I'm in the process of finishing a book that I'm writing about the second renaissance that Bitcoin is going to be bringing about, because it's not like that's just one angle. So like let's talk about what happens to society broader across that touches everybody in say American culture right now, like what Bitcoin does, bringing back, and I've written about this multiple times for Bitcoin Magazine and my own Stack and other I think I wrote about it for Simply too. What happens to society when savings becomes a strategy for wealth generation again? Because the last time I've seen that strategy play out very well for a population was our grandparents, right? Because they could work on what we deem to be a low salary, save up enough to get a house and a car, and they'd be good. There that is impossible today, right? It's not even conceivable. Like you can't even save up to get a car, let alone a home.
What's so interesting about that is that we have video evidence of it. We have video evidence of teachers, being able to live off of teacher salary and
Not just live, thrive.
thrive. A man going to work and the wife staying home to take care of the kids, take care of the house. Like
Yeah.
that's not some hieroglyphic stuff. We have evidence. We are in such a new experiment. It's really weird. I'm sorry. You got to continue.
Oh, you're good, man. Like that's like the whole idea. But so like what happens to society when that's capable? What happens when it's not just 1% of the population that has the time and the capital to chase down their dream? What happens to America when nobody is like not nobody, but when a meaningful percentage of the population is not forced into working 2 or 3 jobs per adult per household? What happens when we can get back to now it's not going to be a perfect transition, right? We're not just going to go right back to the 40s and everybody can just like buy a home off a single adult salary and be able to raise a kid. We're probably going to go through a transitionary period of where we go back to multi-generational homes, to where we build up the family wealth, and then we get back to the capability of having single income homes being capable of supporting a family. That's probably like the next 50 to 100 years. So people need to like not get that kind of like that fantasy in their heads like it's gonna be capable within their lifetime. I don't think it's gonna be capable. So like just be responsible with that.
When
But
you say
what
multi-generational homes, you mean like kids and then parents and then grandparents,
yeah.
like kind of combining their economic power to survive for for a moment.
Yeah, well, and just the efficiency of work for within the home and for the family that allows, right? Because then
Mhm.
grandma or grandpa or both can look after the newborns and the young children, while the teenagers and the parents are going off to work, getting a bunch of like the home care stuff taken care of and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yep.
Um, so I think that's probably in America's like nearest future. But what like the things that can happen when a society's populace can just save and be able to benefit massively from it, we can get into being able to like actually take the time to investigate their investigative or investigative investment strategies. So they actually know personally what they're putting their money towards instead of putting money into some fund manager's pocket, so they can make the same mistakes that they were going to make with their money and then lose out the 20% on top of that, plus the 2 and 20 carry. Like, that's just ridiculous. And then it also gets into the point of like, what happens to a population that's capable, because the savings is a wealth generating strategy, what happens to the spiritual health of America?
I have to pause you. You talked about putting money in the pocket of the equity manager, the fund manager. Dude, my company is just getting acquired by another company. Which company, it doesn't matter. Go find it on LinkedIn if you care. But I was so excited because my former 401k was Vanguard. And of course, they're like anti-Bitcoin, even though they own 10% of MicroStrategy. And I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to do minimum contributions to that. Screw them. I'm going to keep my money. I can do better. Move to another company, and their 401k is managed by Fidelity. I'm like, okay, they see the light. They're orange pilled. Like, we're going to get Marathon. We're going to get Clean Spark. We're going to get MicroStrategy. We're going to get Bitcoin ETFs. I'm going to be rolling. I open it up. I look at my Fidelity. So this is 2 days ago. I open up, get ready to transfer my 401k. All the funds that Fidelity is offering me are owned by Vanguard. I'm like, what is going on?
I also have a Fidelity 401k, and you can't, like, you have to get it to a self-guided or like a brokerage account, and you can do it there. But
let's talk about that offline. I need some help. I was so pissed. I was like, the best exposure I could get, MicroStrategy 0.59% on the mid caps. I'm like, minimum contributions. I'm sorry. Anyways, deviation. That's a funny story. Continue, dude.
No, it's a talking point that I would guess and assume that a lot of your listeners are also gonna like run into that issue. It's possible. It took me a while to figure it out, but then so like we talked about like what it does to, it brings back the capability of like the individual and the family looking into like their spiritual like health, and which is very, very important. It's been aggressively it's another thing that's been kind of like buried and pushed off to the side here in America, like through the education system and everything else. And then what also happens with society when you can save and generate wealth?
Hey, it's Ulric, and real quick, I just want to thank you for watching. At Coinbase, we strive to separate ourselves by making principled content. Your subscription helps the algorithm recognize that our message is important and should be seen by more people. So help our stories get to others, hit the sub button, and don't forget to share, even if just to one person. Let's change the world.
I'm trying to think there, because like you can touch on almost anything by shifting that very small, or not very small, it's a very big thing, but it's a very singular strategy of just being able to work hard, live below your means, something off to the side, and then use it for a big purchase later, or you use that to generate wealth for your family off to the future so you can pass it down to your kids later. Because this is one thing I wanted to touch on. Generation X, or like our parents' generation, is like I think it's the first generation where they're seeing activity.
Your parents' generation. I'm
my
older
parents.
than you.
My parents. It's the first generation where they're seeing these parents like basically burning through their retirement rather than living to pass it down to their kids and their grandkids. That's right. Like that's very meaningful and negative, because like they're not trying to live for the future. They're just trying to kind of like live out their lives with like social media and everything. Like, look at me, I'm like 60 years old and I'm out here traveling the world and taking cruises and stuff like that. It's like nobody cares.
Mm-hmm.
Like why are you trying? Like it's kind of like they're trying to ride the social media wave that we got on when we were in our teens and our 20s, and because it took them so long to grasp it and like get exposure to it, now they're on that wave in the middle of their retirement, so they're burning through all their money. But one other thing I wanted to talk about with the Renaissance, which I think is almost more important than those societal aspects, would be like what Bitcoin is doing through mining and through energy generation. Because when you have something like Bitcoin that is Bitcoin miners that are the buyers of both first and last resort, they're going to gobble up everything that they can get access to. It increases the efficiency of production and grid balancing. And when you, so like, then that's one of the main benefits of like electricity and the alternating current that was it Edison or was it, whoever, it doesn't really matter. When alternating current was produced to the point of where we could have reliable power provided to an entire nation or entire community or entire region of the world, when you have reliable power, you can do things as far as like keeping food cold. So you can like make a restaurant. You can do things as far as like keeping insulin cold. So you can like treat diabetes and everything. You can, you don't have access to reliable power. You don't have the mental freedom to be able to test things, right? Like you can't do R&D if you have any fear of the power dropping out within the next 30 minutes while you're trying to do an experiment. That's just not that that dog ain't gonna hunt, right? Like you
I
can't.
want to cut you off because what you just said right there, when you don't have that float, when you don't have that float of if something goes wrong, I'm okay, and it's not a critical error. I think it's the same in regards to your last example, where it's like people, what's the potentiality of people who can thrive off their savings? I think you coming from the military, of course, we're not segueing into it as yet, but what's the ability for a unit to operate when their intelligence is pure and accurate and reliable? You know, you can go into enemy territory confident because you got it all mapped out and you ain't never been there. And so when that savings is solid, what's the likelihood that my $100,000 I've saved is good for the next 5 years? And right now the only intelligence that we have is that we know it's not solvent. We don't know how not solvent it is. And that's why we're in this state of panic from the lowest of class all the way up to the upper middle class. And so I think that savings, I think that load balancing gives us this room for comfort so that we can push ourselves to limits that we didn't know before.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that I've noticed within the civilian population here in the US that is not like a concept that people are really used to. A lot of funny enough, a lot of guys who play video games, they're used to it. Because in a lot of video games, in order to like met out success, you have to build a position of strength in a position of power, which means access to reliable resources and security.
StarCraft.
Yeah, so you can go forward and expand outward, right? Like that's the whole thing. You accumulate resources, build up a kind of treasure trove, so you're secure. You know exactly what you have. You have everything that you need for X amount of days or years or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So you can go out and take risks to find something new, or to figure out something new, right? Like it's the same thing with pathfinding. If you're gonna be Lewis and Clark going off to explore like the wilderness, they're going to have a level of security, which is like you used in the military example, their knowledge and intelligence of like being able to bring together resources and everything within the wilderness. So they know how to survive. They know how to make a tent. They know how to build a fire in like almost any condition. They know how to hunt. They know which berries and which plants they can eat and which they can't. Like that's all operating from a position of power. And that relates back to this whole Bitcoin thing. It relates back to the energy generation. So let's talk about the energy generation real quick, and then we can pivot on to whatever the next topic is you deem like proper or necessary. So like one thing that's really big about society today, aside from the currency debasement, which is a problem, which is the inflation that most people are hearing about. Inflation that most people are hearing about as far as the talking point isn't asset value increase. It is currency debasement. They're the two different like kind of like aspects of inflation, right? They get conflated into one definition. The currency debasement is causing the dollar price to make everything go up because there's more float, like what you were talking about. There's more dollars floating around in this pool or this ocean of money, and everything else is just kind of like staying on top of it, right? Like while we're being left chained to the sea floor, the sea level is rising, so we're drowning in it. And like the important part about this is that it's causing the cost of like product development to go up, right? And one of the big reasons for that is because the cost to produce that energy is going up, because we have ridiculous regulations that are coming out and making all this stuff extremely difficult. Like, say for example, the apple of the eye of the energy kind of like industry right now is nuclear, but it's been hindered for decades because everybody's afraid of a Chernobyl incident or what have you, and people are completely uneducated on the fact that these Mark IIIs and even these Mark IV reactors are built in such a manner and with such materials that even the crews that were working on site would not get irradiated if there was a meltdown. And those sites are almost entirely automated for responding to the meltdown process. So you don't even need like a massive crew or barely even a skeleton crew for that stuff to be like consolidated and kept like under wraps so that the rest of the community doesn't get impacted. But nobody knows this, right? All this Chernobyl stuff is just pushed into everybody's kind of like zeitgeist to keep them fearful of it so they don't touch it. And if we aren't using something like nuclear, which is the most potent and reliable energy generation source that we have, then we're forced to use the less efficient methods. We're forced to use natural gas is very efficient. So like, I don't want your listeners to think that it's some sort of archaic thing. Natural gas is very clean, very efficient, very reliable, but it's still expensive.
And when you say expensive, you mean expensive to ship and move?
Yeah.
Or is it it's not it's not excuse me, it's not expensive to harvest, but
No.
if you're only harvesting in one location like Russia or America, and Europe wants it, well, you got to deliver it to them, and you got to deliver it to them in a state that causes it to be more expensive. Liquid natural gas, basically drop the temperature. Yeah. So the transportation is where it costs. And of course, certain people benefit from that cost. It's like, hey, yeah, I can transport it. I can liquefy it. And that's, maybe there's an incentive to keep that going, much like there's an incentive to keep these wind solar batteries going, where people are making batteries, people are making solar panels and stuff like that. It's not a Ponzi, but it's kind of like this Cantillon like beneficiary for whoever has the politics involved, can centralize that money flow to them. But nuclear, hey, you can build a nuclear plant almost anywhere with enough cooling, and people can thrive. But they don't want everyone to thrive. They want certain people to benefit.
Yeah. And the other thing too is like with natural gas, like we were stating, it's relatively cheap if you're in the local. It's very cheap if you're in the local area where it's being harvested or produced, which is going to be on the oil wells typically, because you get associated natural gas with the oil basins. The reason it gets so costly is that if you're trying to transport it from an oil well, which is typically very heavily separated by large distances from major major metropolitan areas, typically, like if you look at Texas, for example, like the Houston, Dallas, and Austin triangle is heavily populated, right? But then when you go to the western half of Texas, it's just desolate desert, and that's where all the wells are. What makes it expensive is if you're going to transport it in its gaseous form, you need a pipeline. But if you're going to try and liquefy it, you have to, like, there's 3 or 4 rounds of filtering that natural gas. And like, I think it's 1 or 2 rounds of filtering, and then you freeze it to negative 250 degrees. I want to say, I can't remember if it's Celsius or Fahrenheit. It's very, very cold. And then you filter it again.
Probably Celsius.
Yeah. You filter it again, and then you have to put it in a very heavily pressurized, basically cement ball, because that's the strongest structural integrity, like kind of like system that they can put it in, then you have to transport it that way and then like bring it to that. That's why it's so expensive. But when you have Bitcoin miners buying up all this access to energy anywhere they can find it, whether in like one of the biggest honeypots for Bitcoin mining is going to be what's going on in the Middle East with all of their oil drilling, is because they don't have any regulations like the US does on flaring or venting. So they're effectively, I can't remember what the value was. I wrote about it a couple years ago, but there's, I believe, a couple thousand terawatt hours worth of power that's being burned off or vented off in natural gas across the world right now. Like that's multiple gigawatts. That if it's thousands of terawatts, it's going to be thousands. It's going to be multiple numbers, probably the double digit gigawatts of power that's being wasted just because it's not economical. If you think about that, being able to, so like if you have like say like 1 or 2 gigawatts worth of natural gas is being flared off in one of these oil fields out in the Mideast, you could consume half a gigawatt or even less with Bitcoin miners to bring out a power plant, use that power plant to build out infrastructure within that area to utilize that power. And then you can use that power to build out more power infrastructure to consume it from there. Like it's literally like a civilization expansion, city building like strategy, right?
Brandon Quittam's in his, the pioneer species kind of thing.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. The total mycelium network.
Mhm.
It's like Brandon Quittam's writing was like instrumental to like my starting to write about Bitcoin because he caused me to think about things.
Same with me. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
And so like when you have this, and the reason I wanted to go down this kind of like extrapolation of like the energy system, when you do this and you allow Bitcoin miners to start gobbling all this up and building all this power infrastructure, then these power utilities are doing in the US and are going to be an example for the rest of the world is that they make agreements with the miners. It's like, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to produce power. You're going to buy power from us. We're going to do a joint venture where we share in some of the Bitcoin that we make off of this joint venture. And then we're also going to be expanding that power infrastructure so we can bring civilization around these operations, right? So like we can bring businesses on, they're going to pay a premium for the power, whether it's the data centers that are using it for high power compute because they're paying up to 15 times a power premium versus what Bitcoin miners are paying, which is big for the power generators. If they're going to be allowed to make all this money, that money is going to pass down to their employees and their workers and their contractors. That money is going to pass down to the communities and everything else where all those contractors and employees live. That's how you expand civilization. When you do that, you also increase the supply of electrons, which if you understand economics, increase the supply. That when you're increasing the supply faster or well beyond the demand of the area, you drop the cost, right? Because you have to in order for people to use it up. And when you do that, you bring down the cost of product development and manufacturing, right? And then you start getting to the point of where you can make goods cheaper, but they're still as reliable as the goods that they were like 10 years ago. Like imagine if we could get like these supercomputers for like a third of the cost, which is what they should be, right? Because they've stayed $1,000 or $1,200 for like 10, 15 years. Or some of them actually even gone up because of just like, oh, it's got 3 cameras. You can take better social media selfies and stuff like that. Cool. Great.
Look, we added a new AI software that doesn't cost them anything.
Yeah.
But let's charge the consumer.
Yep. And so like when you have like this kind of stuff, that makes that can make a meaningful impact on the consumer, right? And like it might not mean that the next iPhone is going to be cheaper, but what it could mean is that they stop going up in dollar value price. And then you can allow for like the wages that the average American is earning to increase while the cost of the goods stay low. Like that's kind of like the balancing act because wages have been stagnant for like 50 years.
Right.
And that's largely what we're paying the cost for. So like when you do that, then you can start looking at the cost of healthcare and everything else coming down. And then when you have like the relationship we talked about with savings, of where the family is capable of looking into things properly, and you take some of the stress off of their daily life because they're not working 2 to 3 jobs per adult. And then you start to see how then that frees up a lot of their mental capacity and everything to work on, say, disciplines, right? Which would involve eating better, working out
Working out.
consistently. Yep. And then you start to drop the general cost of healthcare for a nation because the population is getting healthier and they're getting more intelligent and they're getting more disciplined because they have the freedom and the state of mind to be able to engage in these what are very cognitively costly things to start doing. Right? Because if you're going to start a new discipline, anybody who's started a new thing, whether you're trying to pick up working out or whatever, it sucks for the first couple of months because you have to dedicate a lot of mental energy and effort in order to like really ingrain it and like understand it and build it into a routine.
And your body's telling you, no, 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 no,
Yeah.
no, we don't like this.
Yep. So like when you get all of this working together, you get a really, really cool future, right? Because then you've got a population that's getting healthier. You've got the economics of society are starting to rebalance in a proper way. You start to get people that are more spiritual, more intellectual philosophically. You've got people that are working trades and everything else. Like everything starts to improve so much better because it's the counterbalance to all the inefficiencies that a fiat currency invites.
So you basically just gave the formula for deflation, for monetary deflation, for societal deflation, so that people can earn, not buy back their time, but fight back for their time. And this does not happen without Bitcoin and without Bitcoin mining manifesting throughout the world. It's remarkable. It's really, and it's scary at the same time because literally this is the only chance to do that. And people are still kind of closed off to it, or at the very least, or the best that they are is like, oh yeah, I'm a Bitcoiner because I have some MicroStrategy stock. We're still early. It's really crazy. By the way, full disclaimer, I love MicroStrategy. I have MicroStrategy stock, but it's sad where people are looking at this construct that can change the world and they see it at such a superficial level. It's really it's discouraging, but it also is encouraging me to keep on doing this podcast, keep on doing the Pleb Underground stuff, keep on writing, and I'm glad that you're doing the same thing. Now, speaking of writing, I want to go back to, this question. I've known you for 3 years now, over 3 years, almost 4. And I've never, you were always, from my past perspective, you were always in the Bitcoin magazine chat. It was just like Mike Hobart was there, and then we did the Declaration of Monetary Independence. When did you actually start? Because I'm feeling like you started around the same time as I did, but I don't want to tell you when I started. What month did you start your first article, Bitcoin magazine?
Oh, I might have to actually look at that. I can't
Roughly.
honestly. I want to say probably it would have been April or June of 2021. I think.
Yep, that's it.
I could even look it up while we're
Yeah,
talking.
and
But
so that's funny because I always will remember my first article was April 21, and so it's funny, like I was so excited to join the little group chat and talk to other Bitcoiners, and I felt like you were always there, but you were also kind of new as well. So it's funny
yeah,
to hear that you literally came on to the scene the same time as me. I think I'm always 10 years from now, I'm going to say, yeah, Mike Hobart, he is, we were twins. We were Bitcoin twins. That is too funny, man.
brothers of the pen, basically.
Man, brothers of the pen. That's, and I give also the same story to Michael Saylor. I bought Bitcoin around the same time as Michael Saylor. I was playing around with cryptos in 2017. But when I became a true Bitcoiner, it was pretty much like almost the same week from the narratives and the stories that he tells. So it's really remarkable how like people turn on the light kind of around the same time, or people get ignited around the same time to do good work. I want to say that there's more. Let's just say there's more to this world than meets the eye. So I appreciate that story. And also, of course, you know, we have I'm a military contractor. I work in the military industrial complex for my day job. People want to know more about that. Of course, they can go to LinkedIn. I'm not, you know, there's nothing to hide. The government knows me. But you also had some time in Army aviation. Yeah, I just interviewed Mickey Koss. I'm going to release your guys' episodes back to back. Bitcoin veterans, holler at me.
Hell yeah.
But,
I'm honored to follow Mickey Koss. Let's go.
Oh man. Oh, it's great. It's great. I know he's going to do well. He is always a pleasure. And he's kind of like our Bitcoin magazine little brother, because right when we were kind of phasing out, he was coming in and he was writing so many pieces every week. He had like 2. It was amazing.
Yep.
So I want to know, how does your conditioning, I asked him the same question, how's your conditioning with your military experience lead you to Bitcoin adoption? And I want to add on to that, how does your training hinder you as well, to see like that fiat world that may impact you and your Army brethren? Of course, you know, you have this training that says like, hey, you know, I can see, you know, goodness or objectivity, mission oriented. But of course, you know, they're also training you to essentially follow orders. And you know, where do you kind of break that apart? How do you see the forest for the trees, if you will?
Well, that's like that. I mean, that's one of the biggest benefits of like the military training and mindset is like they, depending on the job, right? Because for depending on the MOS or the military occupational specialty, you're gonna have different like leadership qualities and angles, right? But when it comes to like my experience with aviation and working with like some of the special operators, is you can't value the trees without seeing the forest first, right? You have to see things from the high elevation view first before you can understand like the actual mission parameters and objectives. And I relate this in some of my writing to like if you're going to be like a recon element for the military, you have to see the lay of the land first. Like you have to see the topography. You have to see where like the egress and ingress points are. Like you have to know how you're getting in and how you're getting out, right? And then everything kind of falls in line from there. Like the most ideal like kind of like path forward, most ideal path out, different kind of like contingencies as far as like plans B through D, like stuff like that. That really helped me out with a lot of the Bitcoin stuff because I mean, coming out of the crypto angle of just like getting out of like the marketing and like the kind of like the ways that they sell things in the crypto space of like, oh, my community and all this other stuff to like make you feel like you're part of like a group and all that. Yeah, it's ridiculous. But like that kind of like helped jar me out, right? Like having the military training, like, or military exposure helped jar me out. It's the emotions that pulled me in first. Is between like the military objectivity and then coming across American Hodl's old rants on Twitter back in 2017 and 2018 of just like him saying is like, no, you guys are being dumb. Like you just need this one strategy, this one angle, and you hammer it home for a couple years and you're set. And I was like, oh damn, I've been had this whole time. Like I wasn't seeing like the light, you know. I had gotten lost in the forest diving into the trees essentially. So I had to get pulled back up and like kind of like almost like shaken out of my hypnosis. But like the one thing that I think is probably more important is where the military gets in the way of seeing that objectivity. So like when I first got exposed to Bitcoin, which was 2017 while I was on deployment, I was started talking about it with my unit and my leadership about how interesting it is and like looking into like the Federal Reserve and money and investment strategy and all this. And then getting educated, or maybe not educated, but briefed on at the time, they said it was illegal for American soldiers to own Bitcoin. And I was like, well, that's great. I don't care because this is for my benefit. I'm not taking drugs. I'm not killing somebody. I'm not stealing from anybody. So why are you telling me that I can't have this?
Talk about a first principles exercise right there. It's crazy.
Yeah, so I was just like, and like this is after I had learned about like, Bitcoin like cold wallets and like the having the seed phrase, protecting it properly. And that's where that was my first exposure to like what I call spiteful ownership now, of like you can possess, this is the only asset or thing that you can own that can't be forcibly removed from you in any strategy or any approach. I was like, all right, well, great. Like Uncle Sam can tell me I can't own it, but I'm owning it now. I'm going to continue owning it into the future. I'm going to own more of it into the future. Like, what are you guys going to do about it?
A true bearer asset.
Yeah. I was like, I was just, and that was probably just me being in like being a boastful 27-year-old. But I was just like, what? Come take it. Like, what are you going to do? I'm going to blast it all over the internet and I'll probably get you guys exposed. Like, no. And this was, mind you, this is when I had like 15 followers on Twitter. Like, I didn't do anything. But it honestly, it almost like getting told that honestly made me want it more, because I was just like, who are you to tell me that I can't have this? Like, this is ridiculous. And like, the more I kind of went down the rabbit hole, I was just like, oh, it's because it's a challenge to the dollar. That's why.
As Donald Trump said, by the way, would have voted for him if it mattered in California, but dollar hegemony. He said that in 2017 when he was bearish on it. He said it in 2022 and 2023 when he was on his campaign trails. And it was only towards the end when the right lobbyists were coming in and said, yeah, have fun with your little Bitcoin, which he still thinks it's a toy. But then he comes back his recent interview talking about, he's going to force all the BRICS nations back onto the dollar. The dollar will have superiority. You could say you can replace BRICS and put Bitcoin in there. It's the same narrative. The US government, no matter who's in charge, Donald Trump may be the lesser of multiple evils, but he is there to ensure that the dollar is powerful, because Bitcoin is a short on dollar power. There's no way around it. And a lot of Bitcoin influencers try to jump through hoops to try to avoid that narrative, capital asset, whatever. It's pay off the federal debt. Bitcoin is the anti-dollar, and we have to get our minds around that. What does that mean for society? How can the United States or your country or your locality flourish without its money encroaching and coercing people? That's the great question.
Yeah, and I think so that was one of the hardest points, and that's also one of like the consistent like pangs that both we're dealing with like within the Bitcoin veterans like group, but also with Operation Bitcoin specifically. That's why Gabe is kind of like taking on that initiative, is that we all kind of kept running into this issue of soldiers and veterans thinking that Bitcoin is patently unpatriotic because it challenges the dollar hegemony. And that's one thing that like I try to really kind of like push out. It's like, no, the way the dollar is being used for the last 50 years, or at least since, or actually it's more like 100 years since the Federal Reserve has been formulated, the way the dollar has been used is patently unpatriotic, because it's using the U.S. population as effectively bleeding cattle. Like, we're just cattle that they're bleeding all of this value and this energy and this time out of, so that the few people at the top can benefit, and especially the organizations like the Federal Reserve.
And not only us cattle, but also internationally, using the dollar as a form of imperialism, right?
Yeah, through the economic hitman model of like getting countries onto using the dollar for trade, and then taking on our infrastructure projects, and us sabotaging those projects so that they're indebted to us essentially into perpetuity. Which is also why the IMF and the BIS, which are offshoots from the Federal Reserve Bretton Woods system, that's why they've been pushing back against El Salvador so much, because El Salvador was the one to be like, we're going to try something different.
And it was working.
Is working.
Still working. And then they're taking the 1.3 billion, but what if they do the Michael Saylor thing and just use it? Thanks for the extra cash to mine this gold that we found, or buy more Bitcoin. Of course, they probably can't buy the Bitcoin, but it's like, it's still working. That's the catch.
Yep. And now the interesting thing, and this is something that kind of like came around to identifying maybe in the last like 2 years ish. And I've gotten more and more kind of confident in this like position, is that I think that while I do agree that Bitcoin is patently anti-fiat, um, I think that the US is probably smart enough to co-opt Bitcoin to support the dollar for an extended period of time. Now, what will speed up or slow down the death of the dollar as we know it today will be the implementation of a CBDC, which I think is unavoidable. I think that that's coming regardless of any of the efforts that we Bitcoiners try to push out. But also the rate at which that CBDC is both deployed and produced. That'll determine how long the kind of like the pairing of Bitcoin with the US dollar and the US system will continue to thrive.
I have to ask a question real quick. The CBDC and then politics. With all the support that Donald Trump got to be elected, and people, there's a lot of, there's orange pill, there's black pill, there's white pill, there's red pill, there's blue pill. These red pill MAGA, Trump supporters, they're very anti-CBDC. They're not Bitcoin, but they're anti-CBDC. This is what your tax dollars are doing, not realizing that they just print money, not caring. Do you think that Donald Trump could actually, with his base, implement a CBDC and just alienate all the red pill voters that he has? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, dude. Like I've been kind of trying to pay attention to like the MAGA and Republican side of things in particular, just because like the left has like been so far gone for the last couple of years that they're not even worth like kind of like acknowledging right now. Like they're
so irrelevant. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're the children throwing the tantrum that you're just putting in timeout in the corner, and they continue to throw the tantrum in the corner for attention. It's like, no, I'm going to ignore you for a while until you shut your mouth and you realize you need to just sit there quietly for an extended period of time, and then I'll start to like pay attention to you again.
That's why all the smart Democrats came to the Republican side.
Yeah.
The Tulsi or RFK, Tucker, Donald Trump was a Republican. They all came. I mean, Donald Trump was a Democrat 15 years ago. They all came over there. So yeah.
Yeah. So like I've been paying attention to the Republican and the MAGA side for the last couple of years. And the funny thing is, like, you bring up the CBDC thing, especially the MAGA people, they don't like, a lot of them are in like this crypto stuff. That's exactly how they get the CBDC in. Like, because the CBDC is going to be built on top of those crypto rails.
That's right.
So that to me says that it's a guarantee. It's going to happen.
It won't even feel that different to them. It's like this is the network, this is the protocols, this is the constraints that they're used to. Now it's going to be the US coin. And
yeah, because like with the process, so like everyone's afraid, like, and this is kind of like for people that haven't done it yet, this is a good opportunity to just like observe and watch human psychology and behavior. Because, and this is something around like military intelligence too. Like, if you're trying to do something that you know that your target is not going to like, you have to figure out a way to get them to pick it up without them realizing, right? So what I'm getting at here is that all this talk around I think there's been enough signals spread about the dangers of CBDCs to now people that grasp the dangers, they're like, oh no, we can't have these CBDCs. Like, we can't have this authoritarian control over economic behavior, which can allow the steering of the populace through all these different initiatives and these strategies. We can't have that. That's a problem. That's patently anti-freedom and anti-democracy, even though we're not a democracy, we're a constitutional republic. So like, how do you get the population to pick that up when their guard is already high? What they need most for the CBDC to be effective is a cryptographic technology or token that is built from a centralized authority and then is widely distributed and accepted. Because from there, you can do whatever you want with it, right? As long as it's an efficient, actually running system, not like Ethereum, which is completely hamstrung themselves with this Ethereum 2.0 sharding nonsense. Like, it's such a bogged down system. Like, you can't really function anything off of it. That's why all of like the next generation stuff has moved on to these like Solana projects and whatever.
Yeah, Solana's going to pass Ethereum up probably in the middle of the bear market. It wouldn't be surprising if Solana just passed Ethereum up.
Yeah.
Did I say bull? In the middle of the bear market, yeah. Crypto winter, you'll be seeing
Mhm.
some flippening, but it ain't going to be Ethereum to Bitcoin. That's how I see it.
Yeah. So, and you're seeing a lot of these tokens. Like, I think like the MAGA token is probably built on Solana. I think quite a few of the meme coins are starting to be built on it, like all this other stuff. So like that's like the shoe in the door, right? Like that's kind of like keeping the opportunity there. Now what they need to figure out, and this is what the benefit of the crypto community is going to be to these purveyors of the CBDC strategy, is you just let all these different groups throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks, right? And there's going to be a number of things that stick. There's going to be like the Doge coins, there's going to be like the Pepe coins, like the meme coins that people like stick to. There's going to be like the DJT Donald Trump token or whatever it was. There's going to be the MAGA token. There's going to be all these other tokens that stick. They like get staying power because so many people just throw a little bit of money at.
Rest in peace, peanut token. Yep.
Yeah, or cum rocket. Then like from there, once you get wide adoption, then from there you start to manipulate like the monetary values of it, or like the economic, like the tokenomic values, like the inflation schedule. Then you start to manipulate like how like the miners of those tokens operate, which is kind of like what Ethereum was doing. Like, and you're capable of doing these things on these projects because they're centrally planned and executed. You can't do it. You could do it with Bitcoin. It would take an insurmountable amount of energy and coordination in order to do it.
PSYOP.
Yeah.
Imagine telling me that I have to change my node, program to this new protocol. I'm like, yeah, I think we're just going to fork.
Yeah.
So
that's
Bitcoin is already locked in with that decentralization. All those are the protocols can change on a whim.
Yeah, and that's the important thing for people to understand. Like, a lot of Bitcoiners say, like, talk in like absolutes, like, no, you can't do it with Bitcoin. It's like theoretically you could. The reality of it being done is where it's like basically impossible, right? That's kind of like the key point. With these other things, because they're centrally planned, centrally coordinated, and centrally located, like, I don't care what you say about like Solana or Ethereum or whatever. They can claim to be decentralized. They are not. They are not in any format decentralized whatsoever. Because they're not decentralized in a true fashion, they can be wrangled up, they can be squeezed, they can be directed, right? That's how the CBDC is going to be implemented. It's not, I don't think it's going to, and it might be from like one of these, like from like Ripple or something else, but it's not going to be from like a government produced CBDC project. It's not going to be from, I don't personally think it's going to come even from the banking sector, because people already hate banks. Like, they're not going to lap up something from JP Morgan's like, hey, use JP Morgan coin to pay your rent. It's like, fuck you, Jamie Dimon. Like, apologies for the language, but like, that's not happening.
It's going to be received in open arms because it's going to be loved. You can't force someone to use something. You can't force a wide range of people to just say you shall use, especially in America. Maybe in Russia, it's like you shall. It's like, okay, maybe in some podunk Asian country. But in America, you really have to do it in a sly, roundabout way, if you will, from a nefarious standpoint. The people are not easily moved, but marketing works. Put that coin on a Super Bowl commercial and for 5 years, and you're going to get some users.
Yep. Well, and the one thing that I will push back on is that like people are easily moved when fear is involved. Right. Like that, like the last 4 years have been a case study in that. And especially around like all this World War III, like fear going around. Like, people can be pushed. It's just that you have to produce the environment for them to be most aggressively pushed. So like if you were to push out like like one thing that I would keep an eye out for is any projects that start allowing for like a crypto token like Doge to be used to pay for rent. Um, that kind of stuff is like those are the honeypots that I think are going to be the ways that allow the CBDCs to get implemented. It's like, hey, if you pay with this token, your rent for this year, you're gonna have 30% discount. Like that's good.
Critical transactions.
Yeah, between like rent, groceries. I wouldn't say Uber. Paying like medical bills, like stuff like that, like the necessary, like the what has to be paid for, like they're like that's going to be like the next shoe in the door too.
You know, your thoughts that you put out, they're so deep and so profound. You know, it's a very particular audience. You know, everyone can't stomach what Mike Hobart has to offer. You know, you're not for the lighthearted. You're not the general. You're not for a general, you know, oh, it's like, you know, Monday morning paper, what's going on? You know, people have to tune their brains to get, you know, to get on the same wavelength as you. I guess my question is for you, and maybe this is like, you know, helping me grow as a writer to, you know, collaboration manner a bit. Do you write for yourself or do you write for others? And of course, I wrote this down, so I'm not even going to pretend. What is the formula you applied that caused your thoughts, you know, as a relative pleb, to be celebrated and highlighted in such a respected and based publication? I'm talking about ZeroHedge. You know, you've written for ZeroHedge. You got, I think, 1 million views on one of your more famous articles. What was your strategy to get, you know, recognized in that manner? Was it just natural to you, or did you implement something particular? Did you start off say this isn't working, but this is, and then, you know, who the hell is Tyler Durden?
So the first part, like, who do I write for? I write very selfishly. I write for myself. Now it's it's multifaceted because I write for myself because I'm writing about the things that I see that I think other people should be aware of. So in a way, I guess that is kind of like writing for like the audience, but I don't write it in a way that the audience wants it. I write it in the way that I think it needs to be delivered. Which is also why like I could not tell you the dozens of different people that have come to me and said, I need to write less. Like I need to write short form stuff. And I'm like every single time I've heard them out because it's all about, you know, it's more receptive or receivable, like in smaller bites with like TLDRs. And I've told people multiple times, I'm like, no, that's not how I write, because the way, like the things that I write about, I'm sure you've noticed, I like to take a certain tact to. I like to start out with what people know and then lead them to a conclusion that they did not previously conceive of through like, it tends to be through kind of like machinations that were not on the surface, right? Like
I think that formula that you just captured. I'm going to make sure I remember this, but like you start off, your hook essentially is starting with here are the fundamentals. Here's what you know. Here's what's your comfort zone. It's like, they're like, yeah, I agree with you, Mike. And then all of a sudden you blast out of that shell that they're comfortable in, and it just shocks them. And they're either shocks them, so it's like it's too much for us. Like it shocks them to the point that they're hypnotized. I got it. Continue.
Yeah. Because like, and the reason that, again, back to the selfishness, is that's what blows my mind is you start off with a, like, you know, something rudimentary, like something about anatomy that like you've already known, that you've been taught. But then you get kind of like focused down onto the intricacies of how that aspect of anatomy operates. And you learn things that you didn't realize were there or were operating or existed. And it's like, oh, and then because you get exposure to that, and then you go off on this little tangent like, and this operates in this way because of this, which is coming from here. It's like, oh shit, I didn't know that was happening. And the same thing happens with economics and geopolitics, right? Because and that's also why on my Substack, which is Just Hear Me Out for those that are interested in, I have a couple pieces where I specifically wrote about complex adaptive systems. And if you understand complex adaptive systems, Ulric, I believe you probably already know this because we've talked about it. That's the majority of every topic that I've written about, is a different aspect of a complex adaptive system, or the same complex adaptive system from different viewpoints, right? A complex adaptive system can be the body, which is essentially like the way people should be looking at their body. So like the American education system has broken down the body as like the brain and the spinal cord being the command centers and everything else supporting the brain and the spinal cord. When in reality, if you look at how everything operates, it's really a amalgamation of independently driven organs that have been brought together in a format where they each support themselves, right? That sounds a lot like an economy to me, right? Because if you look at the way, this is a really cool kind of analogy. If you look at a high elevation view of like anywhere in the world, whether it's the United States or Europe or Asia, anywhere that's like developed, you look at how the roadways and everything developed, they look a lot like the circulatory system in the body, like blood vessels and organs and like neurons and all this stuff. It looks similar because it's effectively the same thing. And when you kind of like, when you look at it from that angle, you can understand that, like, say, focusing on the American education system or the health system or politics or economics or whatever, you're picking a specific circulatory or neuron or organic system, a part of the same complex adaptive system that's supporting itself. So that's like, and that's kind of like the angle that I try to approach from, is that like, when you're looking at complex adaptive systems, there's so many different variables and so many relationships that each individual variable plays a role in, that you can get your mind blown by almost an infinitesimal number of things, right? Like the things that like, say, if you were to look into all the different functions that a red blood cell performs, you're going to have your mind blown. Like all the different things that it transports, the way it transports them. And then when you learn like about the way it transports things, then you're going to have your mind blown about different aspects of like anatomy and biology. Right. So, but anyway, I took us down a rabbit hole, which I'm very, very good at.
I was loving it. I was loving it. That was great.
And that was actually, that was a case study for how I write right there.
I love it.
So like going back to the original question with like the writing and stuff, that's I write for me. And the other part of writing for me too, which I'm sure you've learned, and I know we've both talked about, is that the more we write about these things and the more complex, the more complex the topic that we talk about, it forces you to organize your thoughts and your ideas, right, into a single kind of like, not seamless, right? Because none of it's seamless, but like less seamful, less gaps, a nice smooth transition through an entire idea. And that helps the mind, because like as you're writing, you're also rehearsing, because you're reorganizing, you're getting everything into one coherent, smooth thought or conversation. That helps solidify the information, the knowledge in your mind, which makes it more easily accessible in the future when you're talking with other people. It makes you sound smart, basically. But it also makes you smarter at the same time. But like, and the more that you can understand these concepts, the more you can understand complex concepts, and the more that you can divulge them to an external party, and the more simply you can do it, the more people you can touch and you can reach, which makes you a more valuable educator. And that's important, because a lot of people think that like, a lot of people are starting to label us as like influencers or something because we're writing. I actually had a friendship this morning that I had to burn a bridge for, because they were implying that I had some sort of strategy to be an influencer around this stuff. And I was like, no, I literally just started writing and talking about what I was writing. People liked both. And then they started following me and asking for my opinions on things. And then I started getting on podcasts and they started feeding into each other. That's it. And the people that can't like conceive these kinds of machinations, they think that you're just some like grifter or scammer or something. And I'm like,
now there are people out there like that, and it would be, you could probably point them to 5 to 10 easily off the cuff, and it's like, now that's an influencer, and
Yeah.
hopefully they would be able to see the difference. But to their simple summarization of what you're doing, they say, oh, you're just trying to get my eyes or my engagement so you can build. If it happens, it happens. But you've been here long enough to, you've capped out at your follow, because guess what? Because you're not jumping through those, in my opinion, disgusting hoops for the sake of general engagement, because Bitcoin is so small. You can't really, in freedom ethics and these complex thoughts that we try to bring out, there's not a big audience for them. If you want to be an influencer, you're going to have to sell out. You're going to have to say, I have to talk about this thing. You're going to have to go to that demographic that doesn't care anything about what you want to write about. And so that goes back to the first question. Do you write for yourself or you write for others? By you saying you write for you, that automatically limits you and almost surely cuts you out for the influencer category. It's just economics.
Yeah. And like, and the thing is like, I don't care. Like, if you don't like my writing, I don't give a shit. Go read somebody else's. Like, it's a free world. And like, and also to that point, it's like, if I was interested, if I was writing for the follows, I'd be doing all sorts of that like ridiculous, what I call disgusting behavior of like, oh, if you're in Bitcoin and I'm not following you, like retweet and I'll follow you back. It's like, no, dude, get the F out of here. Like, I'm not like this. It's gross. But to touch on the ZeroHedge thing, the ZeroHedge thing was actually very, very random and extremely boring, actually, this story. So but not boring for me, because so like an individual had reached out to me that had a relationship with my former employer at Great American Mining, my former boss. And the guy's name is Mark Yeftovic, which is he played a pretty massive role in like the development of, or like the business around domain names. And he has his own newsletter. It used to be called Bomb Thrower. He was very like kind of like anarcho-capitalist kind of thing, but into crypto and Bitcoin and all that. But then he approached me. He's like, hey, I have this Bomb Thrower newsletter. I want to include, like, I want to get some of your writing into it. And just so you know, like, I had this crypto focus, but I'm like, I'm in the middle. I'm going to be Bitcoin only. And that's why I want like you included. And I wrote some things for him. I didn't know that his newsletter was on the radar of ZeroHedge. And that's how I got into ZeroHedge. So in the way that ZeroHedge works, from my understanding, for your viewers or your readers that don't really fully understand it, from my understanding is that ZeroHedge is like a newsletter of newsletters. Like they scrape like some newsletters that they have had exposure to that they think are good resources. And they bring them together and aggregate them, and then they put them under the Tyler Durden like publisher. So everything's kind of just like anonymous, but it's not, because they'll give credit to the writer like within the posting itself. So yeah.
So you're saying there is no Tyler Durden?
Yeah. And it's perfect for like it's perfect for the Fight Club. Yeah.
That's so great.
It's very clever.
That's actually actually, when I think about that, that's actually a better story than I expected, because I was, there's going to be a Tyler Durden, but then there's no Tyler Durden. There is no Fight Club. Tyler. Yep. Okay. No spoilers.
Yep. No, it's a very, like, once I grasped that, I was like, whoever thought of this is genius. Like, it's very smart. Now, one thing that I am kind of irked about, though, is that they've archived a number of my most successful articles. And
I saw that recently.
They're making money off of it.
A massive paywall. I'm like, I'll never see that again. You should probably just republish your own stuff on Just Hear Me Out, maybe. I mean, it's already there.
Yep. Yeah, it's already there. I've put it there. But yeah, like I went, like, when I first saw that they were doing it, like, because they did it to one of my early articles, I was like, okay, I'm going through, and I saved PDF copies of those posts at the time on my computer. I'm like, I'm not letting you guys keep all this. Like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah. Always have the negatives, man. Always have the negatives. That's crazy. Hey, I want to ask you one last question before we part. And of course, this is, we're in a Bitcoin bull run. I want to, I'm not the simply Bitcoin or pleb underground type for this show, but at the time of this recording, Bitcoin is 101,357. At least on Coin Market Cap, it's varying exchanges. But we're past 100K, and I'm a cycle theory believer. I don't believe in any other metrics besides, cycle. The cycle theory. I think we're going to have a crash sometime at the end of 2025, or at least a downward movement, crypto winter 2026, and we're going to run it back for the next 3 years. Where do you see this 2025 bull run or culmination of the bull run ending up? And you're not the price guy. That's why I love you. You're just like me in that regards. I'm going to hold your feet to the fire. I want you to give me a number, and we can edit it out at the end if you want.
Well, you don't have to edit it out.
I wasn't gonna.
I wasn't gonna. I was lulling you into a sense of complacency so you could get the honest out of you. So that's actually a very complex question.
We have time. Let's do it. If you need another 5-10, let's do it.
Okay. It'll probably run 15, to be honest. I think there's a lot that's operational right now that can both feed into and ruin the Bitcoin bull run going on right now. So I could see a scenario here of what's going on with U.S. politics, of where this current administration, like if you guys have been paying attention to the deals that have been happening for just like the last 6 months, if not the last 3 months, it seems quite clear that this current administration is trying to leave a scorched earth for the next administration to take over, right? Both within the U.S. and without, internationally and domestically. And if they are going to continue following down this path, I could see a situation where there is a desire to leave the next administration right in the middle of a very painful market correction or the beginnings of a recession. And the desire to do that would be to try and leave a stain on the next administration, to try and like wrap it up as like, see what happens when you guys don't listen to us and you let these people take over, they destroy everything. If that is going to happen, if that is part of the strategy, Bitcoin is going to get dragged down with it. So and this is to your point, this is why I'm capped out in following, is like I say things that people don't really want to hear, and I say it because I think you guys need to hear it. And one of the reasons is one thing that I take on is I got one of our buddies in the Twitter, Vikingo. I got him to like the rant, the continuously rolling rant of like to solve it. And you want to do that because you like don't want to have to sell the investments that you have. I've been there out of my foolish decision making. It sucks, and it sucks in having to sell it, and then it sucks in seeing where it could have been if you didn't sell it, between whether it's Bitcoin or any investment. And I could see a situation where market corrects, it corrects aggressively, and it stays correct for a extended period of time. I don't know, when it comes to Bitcoin, you never know how deep that correction could go. You have no idea how it could stay. But one thing you can be confident on is it's going to be extremely painful. It's going to wash out a lot of people. So that's one scenario I think is possible. There's another scenario where I could see the exact opposite happening, where those potential desires don't come to fruition. The next administration takes over and just start pumping that money printer out, like to the point of, cause like if you look at the S&P right now in equities, like it looks bubble. Like it looks okay, maybe not a bubble, but it looks aggressively overbought. Which usually means it's time for things to start off anyway. But we don't know how long the overbought condition can last. Like the global financial crisis was first noticed in like 2006, 2007 by some of the smartest people, and it didn't come to fruition until fall of 2008.
Right.
That's like almost 3 years.
Yeah.
Like, there's the possibility that we're just seeing the cracks now, or that we're even maybe halfway through and it doesn't come to end of 2025, like you say, or even later. Or it could even go even further because, like, as we saw with September of 2019 with what they did with the market, and what we've seen lately with the blow up of FTX and Silicon Valley Bank and Silvergate Bank and the generation of this BTFP program, they're like, the Keynesians and the MMTers are not necessarily all stupid, right? They can come up with strategies.
They plug those holes real quick.
Yeah, and they have ways of both like wording or naming the projects and the organizations and describing the way that they're going to use them in ways that lulls the populace into a sense of complacency and security, to no fear being accumulated, so that there's no run on bank or anything like that, and they can continue the Ponzi going, right? And that's something that that's another a lot of Bitcoiners don't like to hear. They don't want to hear that the dollar can continue for another 50 years. It could, guys, and it could without the Bitcoin thing being there. And it could also be extended for another 50 or 100 years because of Bitcoin being here, because Bitcoin can act as an overflow bucket for all that excess liquidity capital, because the excess liquidity capital is what has caused the hyperinflation collapses of the past, like the Weimar Republic, which led to the Great Depression, which led to World War II and the development of the Nazi Party. So I could see a situation of where markets just continue to rip, and there's all sorts of just like ridiculousness happening, and then we get a not hyperinflationary, but very similar to a hyperinflationary kind of bubble, like 2001, a dot-com bubble crash. I can see that. The question that you started with is, how high are we going to go?
Just this year, like whatever, put 2026 out.
So 2025, not 2025. The remainder of 2024. Okay, 2025. Yeah. I could see 150. I could see 150.
Your most likely is 150.
Yeah, I can see that. Like, and one of the reasons is, like, back in the day, I was one of those types that was going like ridiculously high. Like, oh, this is the super cycle. Like, there's no more tops. Yeah. Like, right. And like back in like the first time we went up to 50K and 60K, right. I was like, dude, we're going to 300.
2021. We were all listening to Plan B. We were all listening to Dan Held and Max Kaiser. Right.
Yep.
No one was with that was outside of that bubble.
And like, I've learned now to be more conservative, to not only kind of hamper my expectations, but like the expectations that we put, like, also spread to our and those around us. And like, I like inviting people to get absolutely slaughtered because they're thinking we're going to get like some 2.5x and be able to make fast money. Because like, that's the thing that has been tripping off some alarms for me, is you're starting to see like Michael Saylor's talking about going to 200, 250K. He's talking his own book. Like, you can't listen to what he's like. I like Michael Saylor says some intelligent things, but I'm also not like, playing Yahtzee with his testicles. Like, I'm not and that's one thing that's, I appreciate you guys and yourself, like, kind of bringing some sobriety to the MicroStrategy conversation, because there's a lot of
you're talking about the pleb underground.
Yeah. There's a lot of using bowel moves for bong rips going on right now, and it's not healthy. Like, nobody gets healthy from that. So I would say 100K. If I'm proven wrong because we go higher, fantastic.
That's win-win. That's right. Yeah. I mean, truth be told, like, Phil, and this is normally I keep the Coin Beast and Pleb Underground separate, but I will say that I did have that bear market piece that came out recently. I think it's rational with the 3 points that I pointed out. Yeah. But I haven't gotten a chance to talk about MicroStrategy yet, and that's actually my next video that will probably be releasing around the same time that this episode comes out. So people can go check me out here, check me out there, check me out everywhere.
Yeah.
So 150. Okay, that's cool, man. I appreciate the honesty, and I think that's a bet that you probably could take and honestly win. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'm looking forward to seeing this published and seeing all the people that have known us for years finally get a chance to talk on camera. I appreciate you coming on my show. Thank you so much, Mike Hobart. It's been real, and we'll try to get you back on in 2025.
Dude, I appreciate you even asking me to be on it. I love being a part of all my friends' different projects and everything, and it gives us reason to have a long, extended conversation in ways that can help other people, and that's what I like doing it.
Thank you so much, dude. So normally I have this feedback to you guys about the show, and then I think that all I was thinking about during the episode is, what the hell am I going to title this one? We hit so many different points, and we went down rabbit holes that seemed endless, and we could have gone back, but we could have gone deeper. But Mike does such a good job of pulling us back to where we need to be. He is one of the smartest guys I know. Check out his articles on ZeroHedge if they'll let you without the paywall. Otherwise, just hear me out on Substack. If you have the stomach for it, it's not for the faint of heart, but you're going to grow. I'm Sir Ulric, like my father before me. Tune in next time when I have another brilliant advocate for liberty.